In a bold and unexpected move, Mali has taken a stand against what it perceives as Sweden's attempt to weaponize financial aid. This defiance marks a significant moment in the ongoing struggle for African nations to assert their sovereignty in the face of Western influence. The diplomatic tension between Mali, France, and Sweden has been escalating in recent years. With France's influence waning in the region, Sweden has stepped up its involvement, particularly in the realm of financial aid. However, this aid has come with strings attached, leading to growing resentment in Mali, especially as the nation seeks to build stronger ties with Russia. The unfolding situation now raises a critical question. Will the Swedish ambassador be forced to leave Mali, or will Sweden find a way to pressure Mali into compliance? The outcome of this standoff could set a precedent for future interactions between African nations and Western powers. The current diplomatic crisis was sparked by Sweden's ultimatum to Mali, threatening to cut off financial aid unless the nation reconsidered its growing relationship with Russia. This ultimatum was seen by Mali's leadership as an infringement on their sovereignty and a blatant attempt to dictate their foreign policy. In a decisive response, Mali issued a 72-hour notice for the Swedish ambassador to leave the country, a clear signal that they would not be swayed by threats of financial repercussions. This move has shocked many in the international community and highlights the growing determination of some African nations to resist external pressures. This incident is not just about Mali and Sweden. It reflects a broader struggle for African independence from neo-colonial pressures. As more African nations seek to diversify their international partnerships, the traditional influence of Western powers is increasingly being challenged. Mali's defiance could inspire similar actions across the continent, leading to a significant shift in global power dynamics. Since the end of colonial rule, Western aid has often been used as a tool of control and influence over African nations. Under the guise of assistance, these funds have frequently come with conditions that serve the strategic interests of donor countries rather than the needs of the recipient nations. Typically, Western aid is tied to stringent conditions, including structural adjustments, economic reforms, and political realignments. These conditions often require recipient countries to adopt policies that align with Western ideologies, such as free market capitalism and democratic governance, regardless of the social and economic realities on the ground. In Mali, the impact of these conditions has been profound. The dismantling of public services, the erosion of social safety nets, and the concentration of wealth among elites are just some of the consequences. As these policies have disproportionately benefited a small, wealthy segment of the population, the majority of Malians have been left struggling with poverty and instability. This growing discontent has fueled Mali's desire to break free from the cycle of dependency on Western aid and explore new alliances, particularly with nations like Russia that offer alternatives to the traditional Western model. Western aid to African nations has long been a double-edged sword. While ostensibly designed to support development and alleviate poverty, these aid packages often serve the strategic interests of donor countries. By tying financial assistance to specific conditions, Western nations can exert significant influence over the political and economic policies of recipient countries. This approach ensures that African nations align their governance and economic strategies with Western ideals such as free market capitalism, democratic governance, and anti-corruption measures, regardless of whether these policies are suitable or beneficial for the local context. Sweden's recent ultimatum to Mali is a quintessential example of how conditional aid operates. By threatening to cut off financial support unless Mali alters its foreign policy to distance itself from Russia, Sweden attempted to use economic leverage to influence Mali's geopolitical stance. This maneuver was not merely about financial assistance, but about steering Mali's international alliances in a direction favorable to Western interests. Such actions reveal a pattern where aid is not just a tool for development, but a means of political control, compelling African nations to conform to the donor's foreign policy objectives. In a bold move, Mali has chosen to prioritize its sovereignty over financial dependency by expelling the Swedish ambassador and rejecting the conditions attached to the aid. This decision signifies a critical shift where Mali asserts its right to independent foreign policy decisions, free from external coercion. By doing so, Mali is challenging the traditional dynamics of aid dependency, sending a clear message that financial assistance will not come at the cost of national autonomy. This defiance marks a pivotal moment in the broader struggle for African nations to reclaim control over their destinies and reduce their reliance on Western aid that comes with strings attached. Mali's recent shift in foreign policy is deeply rooted in its internal political landscape. The current government came to power through a coup, a response to widespread dissatisfaction with the previous administration's perceived alignment with Western interests. The populace and the military were frustrated with rampant corruption, economic mismanagement, and the ongoing insecurity exacerbated by insurgent groups. Central to this upheaval was the resentment towards the lingering influence of former colonial powers, particularly France, whose military presence in Mali was increasingly viewed as an extension of colonial control rather than a genuine effort to stabilize the region. In an effort to break free from Western dominance, Mali has strategically realigned its foreign policy to forge stronger ties with Russia. This partnership offers Mali an alternative to Western aid and support, emphasizing mutual respect for sovereignty without the imposition of stringent conditions. By engaging with Russia, Mali aims to diversify its international alliances, reduce its dependency on Western financial assistance, and gain access to new forms of investment and military support that are not contingent on altering its foreign policy. This realignment is a calculated move to create a more balanced set of international relationships, enhancing Mali's bargaining power on the global stage. Sweden's response to Mali's realignment with Russia was swift and punitive. By cutting off aid, Sweden attempted to pressure Mali into reverting to a more Western-aligned foreign policy. This reaction underscores the persistent strategy of using economic leverage to maintain influence over African nations. However, Mali's resolute stance in expelling the Swedish ambassador demonstrates its willingness to face short-term economic hardships for the sake of long-term sovereignty. Sweden's actions highlight the challenges African nations face when attempting to navigate a multipolar world, where traditional Western powers are increasingly being counterbalanced by other global actors like Russia and China. Mali is not alone in its defiance against former colonial powers. Other West African nations, such as Burkina Faso and Niger, have also exhibited similar resistance by challenging the influence of their former colonizers. These countries have experienced political shifts, driven by a desire to assert greater autonomy and reduce dependency on Western aid. Like Mali, they are seeking to diversify their international partnerships and are increasingly looking towards non-Western allies to support their development and security needs. This regional trend signifies a collective pushback against the traditional dominance of Western powers in West Africa. Across Africa, there is a resurgence of nationalist sentiment and a re-evaluation of foreign influence in domestic affairs. African leaders and citizens are increasingly questioning the benefits of accepting aid that comes with conditions that undermine national sovereignty. This renewed focus on self-determination is driven by a growing awareness of the historical and ongoing impacts of neocolonialism. As a result, many African nations are prioritizing policies that enhance economic independence, strengthen local industries, and promote regional cooperation, thereby reducing their vulnerability to external pressures. Mali's defiance against Sweden is emblematic of a broader movement across the continent to reclaim African sovereignty. By standing up to Western pressure and seeking alternative international partnerships, Mali is leading by example and inspiring other African nations to follow suit. This collective action is contributing to a gradual shift in global power dynamics, where African countries are asserting their right to independent decision-making and pursuing development paths that are tailored to their unique needs and circumstances. Mali's role in this movement highlights the potential for a united African front to challenge traditional neocolonial structures and foster a more equitable and autonomous future for the continent. As Mali continues to navigate its newfound sovereignty, the implications of its defiance extend far beyond its borders. The ensuing sections will explore the risks and repercussions Mali faces in standing up to Sweden and the West, the symbolic impact of its actions, and the broader lessons that other African nations can draw from Mali's bold stance. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the evolving landscape of African independence and the quest for true sovereignty in a globalized world. Mali's defiance against Sweden, and by extension, the broader Western world, does not come without significant risks. The immediate economic repercussions could be severe, as Mali may face the loss of crucial financial aid from not only Sweden, but potentially other Western nations that align with Sweden's stance. This reduction in aid could exacerbate existing economic challenges, putting additional strain on public services and development projects. Diplomatic isolation is another potential consequence, as Western-dominated institutions such as the World Bank and International Monetary Fund could impose financial pressures or even sanctions, further isolating Mali on the international stage. Despite these looming challenges, Mali's leadership has made a calculated decision to prioritize long-term sovereignty over short-term economic stability. The government's stance reflects a growing belief that true independence and the ability to chart its own course are worth the financial hardships that may follow. By rejecting aid that comes with conditions that undermine its autonomy, Mali is taking a stand against the continuation of neo-colonial practices that have historically kept African nations dependent and subservient. This bold move is a gamble that may lead to immediate economic difficulties, but it is a bet on the future resilience and self-sufficiency of the nation. As Mali distances itself from Western aid and influence, the country is likely to seek closer ties with non-Western nations such as Russia and China. These countries have shown a willingness to engage with African nations on terms that are perceived as more equitable, offering alternatives to the Western-dominated financial systems. Increased reliance on these nations could provide Mali with the economic and military support it needs to navigate the challenges of its defiant stance. However, this realignment also brings its own set of risks, as it could lead to new dependencies and geopolitical complexities in a rapidly changing global landscape. Mali's decision to reject Western aid conditions and assert its sovereignty serves as a powerful symbol for other African nations grappling with similar challenges. In an era where many African countries are re-examining their relationships with former colonial powers, Mali's defiance could inspire a wave of resistance against aid packages that come with strings attached. This act of defiance sends a clear message that African nations are no longer willing to be passive recipients of aid, but are instead ready to take control of their own destinies, even if it means facing economic hardships in the short term. Mali's stance could potentially spark a broader shift in global power dynamics. If other African nations follow Mali's lead, rejecting aid that undermines their sovereignty, it could lead to a significant weakening of Western influence across the continent. Such a wave of change would challenge the existing global order, where Western nations have long held sway over African policies through economic leverage. This shift could pave the way for a more multipolar world, where African countries have greater agency in their international relations and can pursue development paths that are more aligned with their own interests and values. The long-term implications of Mali's defiance could be profound. As more African nations potentially join the movement towards greater sovereignty, Western influence in the region could diminish, leading to a reconfiguration of international relations. This could result in a more balanced global power structure, where African nations are no longer seen as mere beneficiaries of aid, but as equal partners in global governance. The weakening of Western dominance could also encourage the rise of new global alliances, with African countries playing a more prominent role in shaping the future of international politics and economics. Mali's bold stance against Sweden's financial aid weaponization marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing struggle for African sovereignty. By choosing to prioritize long-term independence over short-term economic stability, Mali has set a powerful precedent for other African nations. The potential consequences, including economic hardship and diplomatic isolation, are significant, but so too are the potential benefits of greater sovereignty and self-determination. Mali's actions could inspire a broader movement across the continent, challenging the traditional dynamics of Western influence and paving the way for a new era of African independence. The struggle for true independence in Africa is far from over, but Mali's defiance represents a significant step forward. As African nations continue to assert their sovereignty, the global implications of this shift will become increasingly apparent. The world is watching as Mali and its peers navigate the complex terrain of international relations, and the outcomes of these bold moves could reshape the future of global politics. To stay informed on this evolving story and other significant geopolitical developments, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell for updates. Your engagement helps us continue to bring you important and insightful content.